In this module, we're going to go ahead and start making a tree. So here I opened 3ds Max, and just like before, we're going to start with creating a base mesh. So we got this tree here, and I kind of like the shape here. I'm going to try and follow that and see how it looks, and then I might modify it a little bit. So the way I start making a base mesh for the tree is I use splines. So I'm going to go into shapes here. I'm going to create line and just start from the top here, maybe somewhere here. I'm just going to draw these lines. So these are Bezier curves. So I'm going to ignore that this is not following the line right now. I'm just going to continue. So I click and drag to make the curve curvier. And just one more time over here. And then I'm going to right click and that will end the curve. So I'm going to select the vertices, select this piece here, and just going to move it a little bit like that. So I quite like the shape. It's very stylized. I like that it has this interesting shape here, quite interesting. But we also need to make sure that it's interesting from all the sides. So I'm going to go ahead here into my create and going to back to the geometry and going to select the compound objects. I'm going to select loft. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a circle, and I'm just going to start it here, somewhere like this. Just going to move it right at the base, but that doesn't really matter, but still. So this will be the thickness of our tree. I'm going to go back into geometry, select my original mesh here, and going to select loft, and going to click get shape. So if you select the path, then you need to get shape. If you select the shape, then you need to get path. But let's get shape, click this. And now we have our tree trunk. So as you can see, it's slightly weird. So I'm just going to go ahead and hold Alt and X to make it transparent. And now we're going to try and mimic the shapes here. So I'm going to go into path here on the right line. And this is a little bit glitchy. Sometimes line disappears. So what you need to do is select the loft, and it will not show the line here. So then you click path, line appears, and then you can control your curve again. And now we can actually make changes to it again. So I'm just going to move it here. And at the moment, it's sort of really two-dimensional, and we're going to fix that in a minute. But first, let's just get the shapes right. I'm going to make this Bezier here a little bit bigger and just rotate it here. And this doesn't fit right, so it needs to make sure that the stump is at the bottom. So I'm just going to move that right about here and make this shape a little bigger. Move it here, somewhere like this. Now I'm going to go into loft here. And I'm going to go into the deformations, scale. And so this gives me the scale of the mesh from the beginning to the end. So if I make this, push this down, it will make the bottom smaller, but we need to do it the opposite way. So I'm going to lift that back up. I'm going to lift this down here, somewhere like this. And as you can see, it's slightly too thick throughout. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a new Bezier here, right about here in the middle. Go back to move, rotate it, and move it down a little bit. And let's move this a little bit out. And so I'm just trying to make the shape a little bit more interesting. Go down a little bit. I don't want to make it too thin at the end because I need some thickness to sculpt. So I'm going to leave it quite blunt at the top. And that's actually quite good. I don't want to follow the shape exactly the same because I want to make sure I have some surface to work with. And I actually prefer a little bit chunkier base. It's going to look a little bit better, but maybe a little bit less so. That looks pretty good. So that's our first line done. So now we have the base of the tree. And now we can go in, select the path, and actually make it a little bit more interesting by just rotating it slightly. Let's go ahead and select the reference mesh here. Just going to move it back. Going to go to vertices, Alt X again. And what I'm doing is giving it a little bit more definition in all 360 degrees. So it looks a little bit better now. Quite like that. I want the tree to be quite stylized, quite chunky. Don't want it to look too real. So I'm trying to give it much chunkier shape than I actually drew, because what I drew kind of looks a bit too real. So let's go ahead and create a few more. So I'm going to go in and create this branch here now. So I'm going to go back into lines here. I'm going to start it here this time. And so right about here. And let's do the same thing. Just going to go into the geometry, loft, and again, I'm going to select the same shape because I'm still working in cylinders here. And so it's a little too chunky. Let's select the loft, path, line, vertex. It gets a little bit too complicated. The alternative is you could actually just render lines thick, but then you cannot control how thick and thin it is on both ends. So that's why I use the loft. It creates this very easy way of making trees. So I'm just going to go to loft settings here again, deformation scale. Just going to lower this down around here so it matches the thickness here. And I'm going to loft this down here. Let's create another Bezier here. And I like to add a little Bezier. I don't want it to be like consistent throughout. I want it to sort of have a curve to it. That way it looks a little bit more interesting. So let's just make it a little bit bigger. And again, we're just making the block out here so we can, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. It looks quite interesting. I love this. So let's go ahead and actually select the path here. And now give this a little bit more thickness. So because this branch goes this way, I'm going to push this one here. Just to make it a little bit more balanced, because you want your tree to look like it can actually hold its own weight and like it has sense of gravity here. I'm actually going to move this a little bit. I'm starting to modifying the shape of my tree a little bit because I drew the sketch in 2D, so I don't really know what it looks like in 3D. So whenever you get straight to 3D, you kind of want to make sure that everything kind of makes sense. So this a little bit here. And I do play around with the shape quite a bit before I render it out. That's kind of interesting. I like this. Let's maybe select here and line. These lofts a little bit glitchy sometimes, so you have to just watch out for that. They are not perfect, but they work most of the time, so that's good. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, I'm not worried too much about the smaller branches because those I can just add as separate meshes. I don't want to overcomplicate the sculpt. Let's just select this one again and get a path again. And at this point, I'm just basically playing around, making sure that everything looks right. So sometimes you would select a mesh and you wouldn't have the line. It's because you didn't select the actual line. So you need to make sure that you click right on the line here. And I'm going to go here, move that right here. Maybe move this a little bit more out. Just making sure it looks right. And at the same time, it looks stylized and cartoony. Because you want to, whenever you make stylized stuff, it can't just be random. You still want to obey the basic laws of physics. You want chunkier stuff at the bottom, thinner stuff at the end. You want to have a good center of gravity. Like right now, it's right about here because you have all this thickness here. And you want to make sure that it just makes sense and the tree wouldn't just fall of its own weight. And that's kind of the hardest part of stylized work, is that you want to ground it in a realistic way. You want to make sure that it makes sense, but in the same time, you want it to look like it's magical and out of this world. But it all has bases in reality, just like with characters. You know, you can make the eyes bigger, you can make the heads bigger, but you always have to maintain that proportion of the body to make it more relatable. I think that's good. Let's just go ahead and add this last bit here. And that is, we have a branch here. I didn't draw it out really well, but I think it will look really cool. This is like having a little sort of cut down branch here. So I'm just going to create a new line. Go here. Something like that. And I'm going to go ahead and add a loft again. And again, we're going to go back into the settings. Make it smaller. Right about here, and make this smaller too. Let's move that right here. So we don't want to actually make it too thin on the end, because I want this to be actually a cut down branch. So it's as if there was a branch here before and now somebody cut it down. It's just going to look really cool, and it's another technique I can show you in ZBrush, how to do these little stumps here. And that is pretty much it for the shape of the top. Now, this is it for this clip. In the next clip, let's go ahead and add some roots to this tree.